Today I'd like to tell you about Aunt Carol's divorce. Kevin was a little over 8 when she split from her husband Leland, and instead of celebrating sweet, sweet freedom, he went through unimaginable torment via his mother. So with all I've said about Carol, you'd probably think her husband Leland was a better person. You'd be wrong. Carol would only ever have married two kinds of people: a deaf, blind, bedbound saint with a bottomless bank account, or someone as scummy as her. Leland was the second. Wasn't much of a dad, wasn't much of a husband. His only saving grace was his mother, who did the bulk of Kevin's care. He was rich, so none of us thought Carol would ever leave him. We underestimated her. Carol randomly decided one day that Leland wasn't deferential enough to her and threatened divorce. This was on his office phone in the middle of the day. By the time he got home that night, Leland had divorce papers to throw on the coffee table right in front of her. Carol tried backpedaling, offering counseling or a second honeymoon instead, but I guess even guys like Leland get tired of throwing money down the black pit that is Aunt Carol, so he pressed for a separation. Leland brought a lot of assets to the marriage. He had money, property, stock options, the works. Carol had exactly one asset. And no, I'm not talking about her crazy. Kevin. I've said before Carol wasn't much of a mother. Well, as soon as it looked like she might not have her son anymore, Carol decided she wanted him. Unfortunately for her, Kevin was with his grandmother that day. Carol showed up and demanded her son. They were moving to Mexico right this minute. And yes, that's exactly what she said to Kevin's grandmother. She was actually dumbfounded when the old woman slammed the door in her face. Of course it didn't end there. This is Carol we're talking about here. Leland decided to keep Kevin around. Not to protect him from Carol, oh no, but because he wanted to establish residency prior to the custody hearing so he wouldn't have to give his wife so much money. While Carol dropped off the radar for a while, Leland kept Kevin under tight surveillance, which is why it came as such a shock when Kevin was kidnapped from school right in broad daylight. Kevin was under strict orders to wait for his grandmother's car before he even thought about stepping outside. He was walking across the schoolyard, maybe 50 feet from her car, when some random burly dude ran past and scooped him up. They got into a blue van with taped up plates that was idling at the corner with its side door already open. The whole thing from grab to getaway lasted about 15 seconds. Totally planned. Kevin's grandmother made a police report, but without the license plate there wasn't a whole lot to go on. That's where our family comes in. You may have noticed this from previous stories, but there's a real strong deal with it yourself mentality running through us. Sometimes it's harmful, like when you've decided to euthanize a mugwump, but sometimes it's good, like in this instance. Uncle Bob couldn't just let his nephew disappear without doing anything, so he enlisted Uncle Craig and my dad to drive over and grill Granny for details. The old lady was taken aback at how not crazy they were compared to Carol, and gave them all the info she could remember. Bob got the idea to drive around just to see if anything matched that description. Well, he must have pleased some deity that day, because they spotted a blue van outside this car shop. They weren't sure if it was the right one until a guy came out, toweling the grease off his hands. Granny confirmed it was the kidnapper. After they dropped her off back home, they went back to the shop to confront the guy. My dad said it was his idea to ask the guy about getting a quote that got him close enough to the car that my uncles could jump in. They grabbed either arm and slammed him up against the car, screaming about their nephew. At the first question about Kevin, the guy blew up. They could all fuck off or he'd call the cops. Drug dealer thugs weren't about to intimidate him. Ah, yes. That old chestnut. Bob said they were not drug dealers. They were the kid's uncles and if he didn't fess up, he would be eating his own teeth. I can imagine the guy's face in that moment, when that light switch first flipped. They were not drug dealers? No. They were not sent to kidnap Carol and bury her in a shallow grave. The only one who wanted to see Carol at that point was a divorce lawyer. Dad said the guy just got pale and started babbling. Carol had told him that her ex-con hubby had gotten out of prison and wanted to take the son that she had raised by herself just so he could use him to run drugs. I think they didn't report the guy to the cops because they felt sorry for him. Carol had fed him this long line of bullshit, and he'd scarfed it down like a Thanksgiving turkey. Dad promised not to turn him in if he just told them where he brought the kid. The guy stammered that he dropped him off in an empty field outside of town. Carol hadn't been there, but a withered old guy in camo gear was. As per Carol's instructions, he gave Kevin over to the old man. The guy apologized. He hadn't wanted to do it. Kevin was a nice kid and had actually talked to his captors like they were human beings, but Carol had promised she'd be along shortly to take Kevin with her. Of course, that never happened. Bob told Leland about the field. Leland got the cops to organize a search party. The field turned up completely empty, not even a breadcrumb to be found. Uncle Craig speculated that she'd given Kevin to some crazy survivalist and he probably knew how to hide someone away really well. Of course, the person who could have enlightened everyone, Carol, was nowhere to be found until she called Leland and requested a custody meeting. Anyone else, in any other family, would have been met with cuffs as soon as she walked in the door, but a combination of Leland's apathy and my family's closed-offness meant that the only ones in the room that day were Carol, Leland, and Leland's lawyer. Carol was smirking when she came in. Leland's lawyer, former lawyer I should say, told me that she didn't even look mildly upset about her son. She wanted to talk terms first. Leland said, "Okay, sure. You can have this much alimony." He probably lowballed her, but Carol snapped up the amount. And Kevin would see her. No, Carol cut in. She got Kevin. She got full custody and the money. At this point, both men were gaping at her, and Carol just sat there smirking. Did Carol know anything about her son's whereabouts? Smirk. Shrug. Because if she did, and didn't turn it over, she would be legally barred from custody. Well, then maybe Kevin would just stay lost then, wouldn't he? The lawyer said he had never seen anything like it in all his years of mediation. A woman so emotionally removed from her offspring that she would abandon him to a stranger out of greed. Leland caved. It wasn't the money, really, or his son. He just couldn't stand Carol getting so much over on him. Carol smiled and took the terms, saying she'd be in touch. And right as she stepped out of the office, she was confronted by her brothers and brother-in-law. They were picking up Kevin right now. Carol frowned for the first time that day. Couldn't wait. She had an appointment. Bob got right in her face and told her if they didn't get Kevin, he would tell Dad she sold her own son. Carol whined against it, but they physically pulled her into the car and went driving. They went to that field. When asked how they'd get Kevin back, Carol smirked. Who knew where he was? Maybe they'd look and get lucky. Dad said he had to try very hard not to hit her then. Carol got out of the car and walked off into the field. Dad said they tried to watch where she went, but somehow she just vanished and she walked away. They waited for a half an hour. Finally, when they were contemplating sending one of them back in the car to get cops, Carol came out of the field from a completely different direction than the one she'd been traveling, walking like she was casually strolling to the store. Completely alone. Dad said she opened the passenger door, offhandedly said that they'd probably want to look in that part of the field, and then got in. The men spread out and searched the field. They found Kevin laying on a tarp in the middle of a stand of mullein. The poor kid was shirtless and shivering. He had tree branches strapped to his hands and feet, and 3 lines of deer blood painted down his face. Dad said when they reached him, Kevin flinched back like he didn't even know who they were. Bob took his coat off and wrapped him in it, then picked Kevin up. Carol was right in the car where they'd left her, looking irked at the wait. They could just drop her off at the law offices. Then she could pick her car up. No, my dad said. Kevin needed to go to the hospital. Carol made her patented cat butt face, but she was late. Kevin could sleep it off at home. Bob said Kevin was staying with them that night, and possibly indefinitely. Carol got a sly look and said he'd probably get lost again if he didn't live with her. She had custody. She had rights. The men exchanged a look. Literally the last thing this kid needed was to stay with Carol. But, well, she had them between a rock and a hard place. No one knew better than them how badly Carol could fuck up their lives. They were not going to win this battle, but they might win the war. They argued her down to dropping her off to get her car while they took Kevin to the hospital. They checked him for all the usual things, even sexual assault, which came up negative, thank God. Kevin was slightly malnourished and had suffered from exposure at one point. In addition to the deer blood on his face, fat mixed with ash had been smeared on his body in a few places. The reason he hadn't talked to any of them so far was discovered when they opened his mouth and found a series of knife cuts on his tongue. Once they made sure that Kevin was mostly okay, they made the long drive back to Carol's. The whole time, Bob kept apologizing to Kevin for making him go back to his mother, telling him he could call anyone in the family at any time for help. My dad said his heart broke when Kevin went up that walk, and Carol just yelled for him to come in. She didn't want to get up and open the door. Carol was floating on clouds of smug. She had her money. She had her son. She had everything. Until about 2 months later, when she got bored and dropped Kevin off with his grandmother again. Granny could have called the cops, raised a stink, but I think she knew in her heart that it would only end badly. Carol kept getting louder. Child support. And Kevin ended up in a mostly stable household. It was a win-win all around. I was only a kid when this happened, so most of this is secondhand. Kevin never talked about what happened to him during that time, where he was. Whenever someone asked him about it, he just froze up with a terrified look on his face, so we stopped asking. To be honest, I would have embraced the chance to have nothing to do with my mother after a fiasco like that. But Kevin's been reeling in the wake of Carol's disappearance, kind of seesawing between grief and anger. I think the poor guy misses the relationship he should have had with his mother, rather than the woman herself. As for me, I say ding dong, the witch is gone.